everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing a watercolor tutorial focused on one really important skill, creating highlights. We're going to be comparing 3 different techniques: negative painting, masking fluid and gouache, and I'll be using all 3 on the same subject, a fig. Each technique will be demonstrated in a separate painting so you can clearly see the different effects they create and how they change the final result. If you've ever wondered which highlight method works best for your watercolor style, this tutorial will help you decide. Not only that, I'll be showing you how to sketch out a simple fig design and how to paint figs freehand. So I'm going to be using the Stationery Island A5 watercolour paper, cutting each piece down to 148mm by 148mm, making our paper into squares, and we will need 3 for this project. And I'm going to be using the Art Philosophy Tropical Watercolour palette that has 12 lovely shades. I'll have 2 water pots, one for washing off previous colour on my brush and the other for making sure my brush is completely clean, ready for the next colour. I'm using the Escoda Versatile size 12 travel brush and my size 2 Princeton round brush. You'll need a white gouache paint. I have my whole beam acrylic gouache and then a masking fluid, and I'll be using my Daler Rowney masking fluid today. And you'll also need a pencil for sketching to draw your fig before painting one or more of the figs. I did a practice run of our composition and have decided to paint the cut open fig with the whole fig placed behind. For the sketch, start with a spiky tip for the top of the fig, then followed by a teardrop shape. Repeat for both figs, making sure to not overlap the fig that's placed behind as I'm doing here. Then for the front fig, draw a small slither of skin at the right side and then a small teardrop shape inside the rest of the fig. For the fig skin, let's draw some vertical lines down the whole of the outer edge, making sure to follow the teardrop shape, making it curve. Now for the inner part of the fig, it has a dipped section, so we can draw an almost sort of star shape to emphasize this, and then some pip style shapes for the inner flesh and seeds. This sketch will be ready for our negative painting style, creating highlights by leaving white space on the paper. Now we are ready for the painting. Mixing our hibiscus orange and sunset pink, we can paint onto the centre of our fig. We have to be careful painting around the pips that we drew earlier, so we are left with the paper showing, creating those highlights. Once you have completed that section, paint the colour reef where the fig's skin is. And then onto the whole fig behind, making sure to leave white areas where you will have the highlights. I've mixed some ocean on the main body too, giving it a lovely colour. You can see I've kept the paper white in these areas. You can now wait for this one to dry and then return to it later. So next, we will paint the exact same figs, but freehand. I've always found if I've sketched out what I'm going to paint freehand, before I attempt it, I feel a lot more confident on painting it without needing a guide. It almost acts as muscle memory on how I previously drew the shapes and where it needs to flow onto the page. So as we did before, start at the top of the fig and paint a teardrop shape, then a jagged point slightly higher, and again teardrop shape, but this time we can paint the whole area, not worrying about keeping areas of the page unpainted. These figs will be for our gouache painted highlight, so as you can see I've kept a tiny little gap between the figs so that the paint doesn't bleed into one another. Right, now for the middle section. Using our Pitaya pink, just painting a teardrop shape, leaving a border unpainted surrounding it. Then mixing in some hibiscus. Really have some fun with this bit, as we will paint wet on wet so you can get used to the colours bleeding into one another and creating some fun textures. For the centre, let's paint in some ocean and then dabbing on some more pink shades. Doing a lovely mix and making that inner section look like the fleshy seeded area of the fig. Then painting in some of that mix on the base of our outer skin and the tip of the fig. We can now let these dry and move on to our masking fluid. So for this one, I'll be sketching again, repeating as we did the first time round. When ready, grab your masking fluid and either an old brush or a rubber brush. I have an old brush here that I am going to use. I say an old brush because once using the masking fluid, it'll probably dry out and ruin the brush. And I'm just going to use it to almost draw or paint on the masking fluid with some small squiggly lines or pip shapes. And then onto the outer border and where you want your highlights on the outer shape. We need this to fully dry before applying any watercolour to the paper. So whilst we wait for that to dry, we can return back to our first two figs, negative painting one and also the gouache highlights. Using our bright green, the parrot shade, let's paint the tips of the figs, adding some of that brightness to the outer edge too. Then with the shade Ocean, let's paint some shadow to the base. And then a watered down coconut for the border. Same for the other fig too. Okay, for the outer shell of the fig, they often have a line detail. Grabbing some Pitaya pink and using the tip of our size 12 brush, painting those curved lines. Or if you have a size 2 fine brush, that's also okay. The colour Ocean will work well for the centre areas of our figs, painting in a kind of star shape and then re-adding more colour and texture to our gouache highlighted fig. Because we will be painting in the highlights with the gouache white paint, the paint being opaque can be added right at the end of the painting with the watercolours, whereas the highlights created by negative space needs to be created whilst painting and cannot be added at the end, meaning forward planning is needed for highlights that you want to be created by untouched white paper. Just a little art tip to help you decide which style that may suit you more. I often like to use the gouache just because of the fact I like to freely paint a lot of the time and I don't like to forward plan, and I kind of just let things flow and create that way. You can see here that I've used the Ocean shade to draw in the curved lines on this one, then adding shadow at that base. Whilst still wet, adding in that bright Pitaya pink and parrot green. Now let's wait for those layers to dry so we can then add our gouache highlights. Returning to our negative painting highlighted fig, I'll paint in some subtle seeds with my size 2 round brush and our coconut and pineapple shades. Repaint some of that central point. Paint some more parrot green to really make it stand out. And then the pink for a really nice contrast. The base where the shadow is has dried a little lighter than I wanted, so I'm going to paint another layer on top of it. Let's go in with the Pitaya pink for some extra details on the fig's inner flesh, dotting it around the unpainted areas, making sure to paint around each of those sections. Painting on that previously painted area with the pink and orange mixed layers. Lastly, for this fig, a really pigmented ocean on the right side and across some of those lines, creating some depth. This fig is now complete. Now to finish our gouache highlighted figs base layer. I wanted the fleshy area to have more texture, so I'm going to reapply some more of that pink and orange, the hibiscus, pitaya or sunset, and then some reapplied onto the skin too, but just using the pink shades for this part. Moving back to our masking fluid fig, now it has dried, we can paint onto the page. So to begin with, get some hurricane blue onto your brush and with a light wash, paint your first layer on the fig skin sections. With the mix of pitaya pink and ocean, add more colour onto your first wet layer, creating a blended ombre effect between the two shades. With masking fluid, it creates a rubbery layer so that it essentially blocks any paint from entering onto that section of the page. You can paint all the colour when needed, and then once the paint has dried, using an eraser, like you would erasing pencil, remove the masking fluid away from the page, revealing the untouched paper below. For the centre, grab your pink and orange and do a similar blend, letting each colour merge together, also using that dabbing motion that we used earlier. The parrot green on the tips, ocean in the centre, and then let that sit to fully dry and we can start to paint the second layer. With the parrot green, reapply some to the tip, drawing in the lines, mixing in that pink, some more ocean, especially on that full fig behind at the bottom. And then once again, wait for that to dry. Our gouache fig has fully dried and is now ready for the gouache highlight to be applied. Just as we did for the masking fluid, let's paint squiggly lines on the flesh area. Going to paint some highlights around the top curve and then some of the top edges of the fig skin. Finally adding a deep pigment of the ocean shade, really giving this one a lot of contrast and depth. I'm using my size 2 brush to paint a pigmented amount on first, and then grabbing my size 12 with some water on the brush to just blend that out. With the tiki brown we can paint the little sprig base and some outlines around the fig showing delicate details. Do the same with the negative painted fig, just painting those finishing touches. The paint on the masking fluid fig has dried, so let's erase the masking fluid off the page. Sometimes you're also able to lift it up off of the page with your hands. I want to add some colour to the unpainted area on that border around the fig's flesh with a light wash of coconut and the parrot green, following the same design as the other two fig paintings. I feel like it could do with a little bit more pink on the centre dabbed on. Then with the same colour, those curved lines. The tiki brown for that little base section on the fig. and then some more reef and ocean for shading. And a touch-up of yellow seeds. And then that's it. You've finished all 3 figs. When looking at all 3, you can see they have a very similar outcome. I think when making art, it's important to understand what you feel more comfortable with and what approach suits your style the most. Even mix all methods together as an experiment if that's what you'd love to do. As I said previously, I personally love the gouache paint for highlights, as I like to let my designs flow and they often change when I'm painting. I don't always use a reference and I design my own paintings from scratch. So if you're similar to me, that approach may be the best for you. I really hope you enjoyed following along with this project today. I would love to know in the comments which one you prefer out of all the 3 figs, and I can't wait to see your creations. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy painting!